So the other thing is the titling of the podcast. Okay, so I the reason why I named it the Vulnerable Scientist podcast is I it was about being vulnerable, right? And uh, the people who are talking about it are scientists. Why didn't I name it the vulnerable scientist? I felt like just adding the fair vulnerable scientist makes it, I don't know, makes it long, of course, because you don't want long names, but at the same time, it just makes it sound like it's the only one. I don't know. So when I thought about that name, of course, I did a research, right, just to find out if there are any other podcasts that have that name. And the place that I did that first is just the normal Google. Then the second, and I found out like it's just topics. The first pages that were coming up were like something to do with just vulnerable or scientists, like oh, the article has vulnerable scientists there, which were very few. That's when I knew okay, now this is generally this is a very, and record this. Let me record. What am I doing? Charging. So I just knew from that point that this will be a very new thing. Like it's like novel. It's not been done before. So that was a big advantage on my side. The topic too. It's not. So I was like, maybe what if the same approach of asking scientists their lives and what they do apart from science and all that. Is there any other um, podcast that is doing that, and what are the names of those podcasts? So that's when because of course I knew from the Google search, if it's not there, then then probably it's not even in any other podcast platform. I don't need to search for that. So I searched. No, I went to the specific. I just searched generally like people who are doing science podcasts or people just related to podcasts, and I found this podcast called People Behind the Science. And I listened to one or two podcasts just to see how the person does it, and it was more of interview, and it was just featuring different scientists. Every episode had a different scientist, and the questions I took note of the questions that she was asking, and I was like, okay, so what is interesting in these questions? Which ones can I adopt? Which ones can I not adopt? Or which ones are interesting? Just to give an overview of what other people are doing when it comes to podcasting. So that was the only podcast I got, and until I found this podcast later on when I had started the podcast or whatever. And a podcast called The Root of the Science podcast. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, I love the way the interviewer approaches it. But it's the same thing. Like the thing that I'm talking about here is talking to scientists and letting them tell their stories. And for them, it was mainly targeted on research. And again, talking about the human, the challenges that they face during that research, and the hobbies that they do apart from research. Just to bring, they were still trying to bring the human side of the scientist from this to podcast. So what I wanted to target on for me, just to make it unique, is not to focus so much about the science. Of course, I still ask science questions because I'm a scientist. I mean, but I wanted to focus more on the person than the science, so that it's, I don't know, it actually really focuses on the scientist. Like I didn't want a scientist to come in and feel like they enough scientific presentations to this non-scientific audience that they need to explain the thing to. I wanted them to just talk about the things that have nothing to do with science but are connected with their career as a scientist. So that was the trajectory that so that doing that market research told me that actually there's someone who actually thought like me and is already doing that, and especially for the people behind the science, they are like in the 600 and something people, so they're like, they've been doing it for a very very long time. I also looked at the frequency of their podcasts, whatever, just to see how fast they produce. Just to figure out what are the other people doing. I looked at the art or that they're using to create their podcast cover art and such like things. So just doing that market research and seeing do they have a website, what kind of platforms are they in, like which podcast directories are they using. And at that time, I wish I knew I could have done more research when it comes to where they host the podcast. That's something I really didn't think about. I just thought, this Buzzsprout, then I'm good, because at that time when I was searching things to do with podcasting, the only thing that was always coming up was Buzzsprout, and I think Buzzsprout does very well when it comes to marketing their podcast platform, whatever, hosting platform. And it's because of those, like if you search for something, you find those answers to the questions that you're asking, and they're always there. There are so many resources when it comes to helping you. So I automatically went with Buzzsprout. So when thinking about the title, I thought the vulnerable scientist is something very like eye-catching. So, but I wanted to know from a scientist's point of view and a non-scientist point of view what they think. So that's when, after doing the market research, you want to be like, okay, so what are the viable names that you can give it? Yes, this is the name, but how do you make it constant? Of course, that's the name, the vulnerable scientist, but how do you make it constant? Do you just add the podcasts, or just leave it as a vulnerable scientist? And the other question is, on social media platforms, how do you put the username? What is the common username that you can use? Just thinking around that, and I started on TV Scientist Pod so that it can be, and mostly I did it on Twitter, just looking at it. The first point, if I think about a username, I think I go to Twitter first. Of course, when I have already my own account of maybe New Biochemist, and I go to the user part and just search, is this okay, there's an option of using, I think, is it name search? I'm not sure, but there's a tool that you can use just to see which usernames have been taken across platforms. But I prefer doing it on, I don't know, that's easier, but I don't know, I found myself still going back to Twitter and logging in and going to the settings and checking, okay, is this username viable? That's what I usually do. I don't know why. Because anyway, the name search gives you a lot of options, like all across all platforms. I don't need all that, man. By the time you're figuring out, okay, where is the Twitter? Okay. No, I just wanted to work with the platforms that I was sure that they must have my social media handles. So I added TV Scientist. I saw, oh, okay. Actually, I tried with different names, but it didn't work. But when I finally found that it is not on Twitter, I went on Instagram. Instagram, it has more options. Like most people, I think on Instagram haven't taken so much of the names, but Twitter, handle-wise, I think most of the ideas have been taken. According to me, that's how I feel. So I always start with Twitter, then go to Instagram, then Facebook. Of course, most of the handles have not been taken because most handles come with people's names, and it's very rare to find. It's harder to find a page taking up the idea, because I think there are less pages on like specific sexy people. Really, like, they just write the name, but they really don't take the username, because there are two different things when creating a Facebook page. There's the name and the username, and people actually most pages don't even have a username. People are not really keen on the username. So that is usually the last thing that I think about. And of course, LinkedIn is now even the usernames are less taken. Like most companies don't have LinkedIn pages. So of course, that's our struggle. I just know, with as much as something is on Twitter, then Instagram, then I'm sorted. And of course, TikTok, yeah, because it's one of the emerging social medias to use. Yeah, so the main things that I look at when I'm thinking about a name. So, like for example, yesterday, just to go out of the, do I want to talk about this though? No, I don't think so. So yesterday I was doing something. I was looking for a name for a specific podcast that I wanted to start, and I was thinking through different names, and just because I'm thinking, when I'm thinking about a name, thinking about a brand, I'm thinking about, if someone sees it, will they be curious to click on that and know more about it? What does it, and when they click on that, what are they thinking about? What is coming through their mind? So I called like two friends, just to ask them what they think about certain names that I had come up with, and what would they be thinking about when they first see that name, and then I tell them what the podcast will be about. Does it match with what they were thinking about? Will they still want to listen more? You know, yeah. So just thinking about a title that captivates someone's eyes. Like if someone was randomly going through podcasts and just sees your name, they'll be like, okay, let's see what these people are about. Yeah, that's the thing that I was thinking about when finally settling on that name, the Carnival's artist. The other thing, I think it's the readability of that name. Is it memorable? Can you someone easily remember that name? And readability in terms of, is it easier to read out or to say to someone? Like if, for example, I'm having a conversation with someone, or if myself I'm having a conversation with someone, and be like, okay, I'm a podcaster, this is what I'm doing. What's the name of the podcast? Is it something that I can say easily and they can hear it easily and remember and search for it? As in, is it easy to communicate what the name of the podcast is? That's what I usually think about. The other thing, is it unique in such a way that if I search for it, I won't. There are not so many things that are fighting with that. It's more unique, like in terms of like if I was to search for it, yes, I have SEO and all that, but is it unique in the sense of I can easily get it because it's whatever you put out, it's very specific. So that's what I think about. The other thing that I think about is the topic. As I said before, you have to think about, okay, is the topic relatable to what your title is of the podcast? So when you're doing your thinking about your topic, just think about, does it say whatever it is about, and does it stand out, and is it unique?